struggle through a post-merger integration when you can glide through it? Why deal with the PMI integration challenges when you can overcome them even before they occur? Why move slow when you can move at pace? What are the world's leading PMI experts doing right now to achieve profit-accelerating integrations? This podcast will give you all the answers to these questions and many more. My name is Dudley Peacock, and welcome to the 100 Days and Beyond podcast. Welcome to the 100 Days and Beyond podcast to the audience out there. Thank you for joining us for another live stream and another fantastic guest. Today, we really have a guest that comes from an entirely different sector we haven't had on the show yet. And I believe that this is going to be a fascinating episode, especially because Robin's experience in that really adds a new dimension to a lot of the episodes we've already recorded up to now. So the audience, I really hope that you stay with us and stay with us to the end. Welcome to the podcast listeners. Thank you for joining us on our latest episode of 100 Days and Beyond, the podcast that highlights and emphasizes the wonderful world of mergers and acquisitions, the wonderful world of what happens post-deal, especially around integrations, post-merger integrations, post-acquisition integrations, and all the things that happen around there. Thank you very much for joining us today, Robin Adda. So, Robin, I'm going to read your profile briefly, and then we're going to go into some of the core details. And I'm really keen to get into this conversation. Robin is a thought leader, serial entrepreneur, CEO of EdTech, Barefoot eLearning. I really have to learn about where that name comes from. But EdTech, Barefoot eLearning, Essential Digital Skills Limited, helping to close the digital skills gap by providing IT and soft skills e-learning to training centers and businesses. And I think that's quite interesting. In your summary, you talk about having founded and sold 3 successful IT businesses: GTS Learning, Barefoot Computer Training Limited, CWP Computers Limited, etc. You also put yourself out there in your early career as a chartered accountant, specializing in corporate recovery, investment banking, and specializing in M&A and corporate finance. And that's significant stuff. So, Robin, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Tell us a little bit about how you got into your whole career, because I think it's got a fascinating backdrop. Please go ahead, Robin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. What a great introduction. So I started my life as by studying a law degree, and then followed the strict guidance of my parents and went into accountancy on the basis that it was a safe career direction. Unfortunately, it didn't totally entice me, but I did enjoy, after qualifying and moving into, as you said, the corporate recovery, because that gave me some independence to go and, albeit run a business that had failed, you were in charge and you were trying to sell it. And so that was my first experience in managing businesses. Albeit, as I say, where you weren't actually responsible for the profit or loss because it was in administration. I then got very envious of my peers in banking who seemed to earn a lot more than me. So I decided I'd like to get a job in investment banking, which I did. And from a large company, corporate finance, I moved into a small merger and acquisition department. And spent a year there, but the bank I was in, N.M. Rothschild and Co., wasn't too impressed with small deals, and so they weren't really supporting us. So I then switched to an American bank, in their M&A department, and that wasn't going too well. I suddenly discovered our whole team was about to be taken by the director to another bank. I thought, I can't keep doing this. So I went to see my one of my friends who was a founder of a headhunting company, which is a public listed company today. And he said, do you want to get into IT? You want to get into word processing? Sorry, we did not use the term IT in those days. Word processing. And I said, well, what is word processing? He said, it's just the future. And so that's how I got into my first job, actually. And not my first job, my first company.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I think that's quite interesting, because I think where a lot of us start off, and if I even think about my background, I studied mechanical engineering and never practiced a day. You were lucky enough to have gone into a bit of a career to a certain extent in recovery and so on. But you know, the weirdest thing is that life takes us in different directions. But I think, and I mean, with four children, I got to say that for me, the difficulty, and I see them struggling with it too, is how do you know what you're going to do one day if you're 18, 19, 20, 21? I think even when you're in your 30s, sometimes you still don't know what you're going to do. And then I think even in today's environment, in today's world, and you're part of an e-learning ecosystem, and I want to touch on that, roles, responsibilities, jobs that didn't exist 15, 20 years ago are now, just accepted as the norm. I just, something that pops to mind is most people don't realize. I mean, we get so used to YouTube or something like that as a medium. I mean, that's a great way to find information. Didn't exist before 2006. If you think about Facebook and all these things, I mean, it's like Facebook's getting old now. But it only started the other day. So things have changed significantly. So that's a very interesting background. So you led into that, and then you started evolving. So you started asking questions, you started getting involved in different things. So you talk about M&A. How did you end up then in an e-learning environment and so on? How did you shift in moving those sort of direction?
Well, the first company, the first transaction I did was with, so I started with this word processing business and ran out of money in 6 months. So I then started again, but with this time with my ex university roommate, who had been working in finance as well, who was much brighter than me, I'd say, although he was a little bit eccentric. And we started this computer company selling Apple computers. It was a fantastic success. To start with, we were the largest reseller of Apple in the UK. But further down the track, the first disposal I made, in fact, rather so sale rather than acquisition, was of our engineering business. We had an engineering and maintenance business, which was small, but it was profitable, obviously. And we were approached by a large engineering firm, services firm, who said they'd like to buy the business, and it hadn't occurred to me that we might sell it because I felt it was part of our company. And so we took a look at what they were offering, and then I said, "Well, look, obviously, we're only going to sell this to you if you take on the staff." And they said, "Of course, that goes without saying." And we then did our first deal, which actually was the worst thing I ever did with that company, because our engineering business was the solid recurring cash flow. And of course, I didn't at the time. I thought it was a great opportunity. I'd never sold a business before. I could pay off all my debts. The world was beautiful. Um, anyway, I got it wrong. There we are. I obviously didn't study my accounting hard enough. But that was my first transaction. The business took over our engineering business, took over the staff, and they were happily employed. And I tracked them for about 6 months, and then it all went well for them.
That's great. And if we look at if we look further on in your career, you started you're looking at Barefoot computer training.
Yeah.
And if I look at the dates, you've got there January 1992, and I want to just talk about what kind of computer training would you actually do in 1992 as opposed to now, and so on. You were there for about 6 years. Firstly, I want to know about Barefoot. Where does that come from? No,
Yes. Okay. Firstly, actually the company it was longer than that until we sold it. We called it the Barefoot Computer Training after the Chinese Barefoot Doctor. The Chinese Barefoot Doctor was an initiative in China in the 1960s. Now, I wasn't around. I hasten to add that I don't want to get you think that I'm a sage. They had this initiative whereby, as most people lived in the countryside, now they live in the cities where that's where the work is. But at the time, it was all farming. If you fell ill in those communes, you were told to stay at home. If you felt worse, go to bed. And if you really feel ill, you'll die. And so they decided they needed to implement some kind of mobile doctor system, which you could sort of equate with today's paramedic. So they trained people up to be barefoot Chinese doctors who went around the communes, teaching somebody in each location the basics of medicine, so that they could actually help people who were sick get better, unless there was a serious disease they couldn't cure. And we were giving this concept started in my computer company and carried it over. In the computer company, we used to get maintenance calls. Our engineering department, computers doesn't work, screen is broken, printer's not working, and you go out there and find that most of these faults were user error basics. I don't think the world's changed. Your computer screen doesn't come on. If you have a contract, you call your central support and say, my screen's not working. They come up, they find you haven't pressed the connection in properly on the computer. So we used to run these courses called Barefoot Engineer, and it would give first level support to create a hero in each department. So or in each company. So you'd have the Barefoot Engineer in the pharmaceutical company, or Barefoot Engineer at the oil company, or Barefoot Engineer at in the copier company, and that would be the go-to guide. If you couldn't get your computer to work, if you couldn't fix it, you'd call us. And that was the concept. So when we started our training business, we developed these courses, which were aimed to basically give first level support. But they evolved fantastically. And we found that at one stage we were training the biggest telecom company in the UK, and they were running a digital, an analog to digital program, and also running a redundancy program. And in either case, these guys got trained in our courses, because we then went on to do a Barefoot network engineer, teaching people how to connect networks and fault finding, and then on to comms and security. And then we allied ourselves with a certification company, a company that publishes exams to get people qualified in these topics, called the Computing Technology Industry Association. And so then our courses were able to be associated with an international exam. So that's where the Barefoot Chinaman comes from.
That's a fantastic story. It's a great differentiator, and it's something one can remember or recall. It's like, who are those guys? The Barefoot guys. Must be, let's call them. And it's like, that's actually brilliant. I love that. And what's very interesting about technology, even that early on, I mean, you're talking about analog to digital. You're talking about a whole host of changes, from even just the personal users through to corporates. It was already being disruptive. It was being incredibly disruptive. I think if you think from the back end of the 80s through the 90s, it was very disruptive in terms of users now getting more and more exposure to technology and being expected to do technology, and companies using technology implementations and the shift into more technology as reasons to do, or as leverage to, I think those days they used to call it right sizing. I think, to get the company into more optimal and so on and so forth. Very interesting. So you're part of that journey. that you did the engineering, you offloaded the engineering business, but then from there, let's get into that, because I want to get into the M&A integration side of things, and I want to try and sort of bring it back into IT and IT learning, and how e-learning has not only has become an industry, because it's become quite a big industry. If you look at the big groups like Pearson and these guys, I mean, they come some serious educational institutions, universities, and these and colleges and that, especially through the pandemic, are being challenged around e-learning. I mean, just in that space, there's a proliferation of solopreneurs doing all kinds of online training how to walk dogs and feed their cats, and all the way through to some really serious training on how to use software, and et cetera, et cetera. I know even one of my younger kids is doing A levels, and they rely heavily on YouTube to get additional math lessons. So even the math tutor business is under threat, if you like, because the access to information is out there. So I just want to throw that in there in terms of the shift of the market. Now we just let's focus on some of these entities, because when I look at your experience, you got thought leader in the industry, founder and CEO of these entities, but you do talk a lot here about the M&A, corporate finance, investment banking, etc. Tell me a little bit about how that sort of links and comes together for you in what you do in a day. Tell us a bit about what a day in the life of Robin looks like, or did look like, or what is going to look like. I don't know, things are changing. And then tell us how all these changes have affected you.
So I'm not the greatest person to work for other people. I don't know. I'm just a bit rebellious, I guess. And so that's why I started work. I really enjoyed working for myself. With the computer training company, we did lots of deals. We bought a small business. We did a partnership with an organization. We then sold our business to a NASDAQ company. And then I started another business, which I ran for far longer than I intended. But then we got approached and we sold that. And that last business was an online, an e-learning business for technical certification. So people would come on board, and we'd sell courses overnight. Our main customer base was in the US, and 80% of our business was America, or North America, and people would buy a license. They'd study online. They'd watch videos online. We partnered with people, so it was all different deliveries. They'd be able to practice labs online, working virtual labs, and they take practice tests online. Then they go take their exams and get a job. So that brought me into e-learning. And then when we sold that business, we actually to the association whose exams we'd been writing content for. So it was I was really pleased with that, because we'd never envisaged that we'd sell this business. Actually, I wanted to do something different, and I was not allowed to go back into technical training. Because it was one of the exclusions past the deal, because I wasn't supposed to compete, which of course I would never do, because I can't compete with the organization's exams we were preparing for. But I decided to move into online learning at the digital skills level. So we started with soft skills, and those courses were accredited. I thought that would be important. Anybody taking one of these courses, which is video based, it'll take up to an hour and a half their time. If they pass the exam at the end, they get a stamp from whichever accreditation body has approved the course, which goes in your CV. Then I looked at the products. I thought, well, every single organization has IT desktop content in there. And so we signed up with a partner to deliver over 100 courses around the Office 365, including Teams, Outlook, Excel, etc. And then we met up with one of the awarding organizations, the government bodies that approves funded courses, or part of the government funded learning process. And they liked what we did. We customized courses and produced courses for employment, skills for employment, and then the latest qualification, essential digital skills. So that's where the new company has taken work, where we're targeting to close the digital skills gap. Interestingly, we are a member of a coalition of companies started and sponsored by Lloyds Bank, PwC, BT, and some others, which is aiming to close the digital skills gap in business. And research is taken every year on how many people don't have digital skills. And in the 2022 research, the findings were that 30% of the UK population, around about 11 million people out of a working population of 32 million, don't have any digital skills. So that kind of gives you an indication of the work that this country has to get itself skilled up.
Yeah, and it creates a massive opportunity for e-learning companies, but also creates an opportunity for people who don't have the skills to potentially get into careers that were not possible for them potentially in the past, or careers that didn't exist, but they are potentially better suited for. I want to just talk about that. When you sold that business, maybe if we look at it from, because a lot of the guys we talk to within these podcasts are people that go out and do acquisitions. You were on the receiving end of being a target. So somebody had bought you, and you'd had the option of, you had a restraint, but you had the option of not selecting something else. Tell us a bit about the psychology of being acquired. Tell us a bit about that sort of journey. You got someone that's interested in buying your entity. Valuing an e-learning company from a valuations point of view is that's an interesting concept, because you got to look at student numbers. You got to look at sort of, can you resell? Have you got a strong enough sales and marketing engine? Because if it's one-off courses and once they've done it, they can't do it again. They don't need to do it again. Is it for retraining? Can you do, how's the business model affect the valuation? And then I want to then just switch then into what was that journey like for you personally? So let's talk about valuation and all that. And then let's get into how you felt as being an owner. And then all of a sudden it's like, sorry, Robin, you don't need to come in here anymore. We've got this.
Absolutely. And I also did acquisitions, and I can draw a parallel between what was important for us when we were acquiring and when we were selling. But for me, the is very simple. I don't like to be the guy who actually who actually crunches the initial numbers. I like to look at the shortlist. So with the last company, I teamed up on the valuation side with somebody in a business school, who was an MBA, and who helped with valuation. I then teamed up with a corporate lawyer and with an accountant. So my team was an accountant who I knew and worked with for a long time, a recommended lawyer who I'd also done some work with in the corporate space, who was extremely conscientious, who also showed me how to do things myself so that I could save fees, because legal fees are never ending. And then with the business graduate, who could take me through all the theoretical valuations of the business so that we can look at which ways. Because actually, in my last business, the offer I received was a bit of a muddle to start with. It was wrapped up, I think, really to make it look big, but it wasn't big. It was wrapped up to include my annual salary for the first year, and so it just didn't look, maybe it was a 3-year contract that they wanted to offer me. So they took 3 years of salary, and the price to buy your company is so much. And so the first thing that we did was to dismantle that and say, okay, so this is the business, this is the turnover, this is the margin, this is the P ratio, the earnings before tax and interest, and and that's the value of the business. Your contract we can negotiate later down the line. Let's keep that out of this discussion. And so we looked at the business. We went back and forth and back and forth, and we finally came to a valuation which was, please say, about 3 times more than the original offer. Then we looked at the which was actually, sorry, I mean, we weren't being greedy. This was actually the correct valuation for a business which was actually very profitable and very consistent. It wasn't like, and just to answer a question about learning, you may have taken a course and got qualified and gone to get a job, and you may not come back. But there's a lot of, the population is constantly there. There are new people coming out of uni, new people coming out of school, new people retraining from the army or retraining from another job, as we can see post-pandemic. People leaving the airline industry to get into hospitality or whatever. So there's always going to be people who need training. You've got to make sure your business is good and your marketing is good, and people see you and come to you, and the pricing is right. So from that perspective, you have to look at the earnings and take a view on a price earnings ratio. And we were a very solid company. And I have to say it was the same with the training business I sold. And I'll say something in a moment about both of those sales. So I think that choosing your professional team, I would always only ever work with a professional team. I'm not I don't decorate my house. I get something to do it. We're all different. We all do differently. I know what I can, what I can't do. And I believe that the way to sell your business is to make sure you've got some people around you who really understand it. But you've also got to have a very tight rein on fees, because fees can run away, as I was explaining with legal fees. So you have to be very careful with that. So that is how we worked out the figures for the sale.
Yeah, and then tell us a bit about the personal journey, because often being a smaller entity, I mean, we're not talking about a $1 billion cap company, but a smaller entity. I mean, it's not. I'm not talking small, but smaller.
Yeah.
You have there's often a sentimental attachment to the entity, because if I look at your profile again, extensive entrepreneurial startup through to successful business sales. So often the entity that you're involved in is your baby. That's the place you spend your time, the bulk of your life, really. The part you go home, that's also a place that you spend a lot of time, and the rest of the time you spend sleeping. But if you think about it, the bulk of your time is in your business, doing your work, doing what you love, doing what you're passionate about. And all of a sudden somebody wants to buy it and they start putting a financial number to it. It's almost like they're putting a financial worth to you, as a person. It's like, this is truly what you're worth. This is what you've done. And it's almost like a badge of, a merit. This is what you're worth. And if they start the negotiation wrong, you have to protect the stuff that you've built and really worked hard at doing. And I think a lot of buyers out there don't realize that there's a strong sentimental connection to the business that you've built over a period of time, worked really, really hard, overcome many, many pressures and so on. So tell me about the transition. So now you've agreed the deal. Tell me about that person. I want to know what it feel like. What was the emotion? So you've been working very, very hard. You've been negotiating. Everyone's in agreement now after a period of time, as you mentioned. And now the contract is signed. You then start handing over the keys. I don't know how long you were there for, a little while, but obviously it's passwords these days, not keys like we did in the old days, but passwords and access and so on and so forth. And now you start bank detail transfers, all those initial integration type of things we talk about. But at the smaller end, it's very, very real. Who's got the password for that? What software do you have, and who's got access? I mean, when you're doing your due diligence, you don't necessarily, as a buyer, know everything. you don't know every single user. So how did you help from your sales point of view? Then we'll go into you from an M&A, from an acquisition point of view. How did you help the buyer overcome a lot of those initial pressures? Because obviously they wanted the entity, signed the deal. Tell me about those emotions as you're handing over and releasing that control, if you like.
Well, it's very difficult because when you're when you run your own business, you are your own boss. When you sell the business, you are no longer the boss, and it's everything that you escaped from working for someone else that made you start your business in the first place. So um, it's difficult. I think my biggest regret is that in my two larger sales, which were the training company and DTS Learning, which was the online certification content provider. I think my biggest regret is that we didn't make friends with the people who bought us. I make friends with people wherever I can, but there's a kind of in both cases there was an attitude of, right, we're moving in here out the way, we're almost as if to say, I'm taking your seat and your chair looks comfortable. And that's a shame. For me, the important thing is the sentimental piece. Really, almost is really to look after your staff, because if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't be there. It's very clear. This isn't a business that these are not businesses I built solo. These are businesses I built with a very loyal team. We had good times, we had bad times. We had companies that went into administration, pulled out. We had, we were looking at the edge of the cliff, looking down, and then we came out right on top, up in the sky. So, you've got to rely on trust and loyalty, and so that is what prompts me whenever I've been in a position to sell a company, is to try and negotiate safe passage for these guys. And unfortunately, it never works out. I mean, in my with my training company, our best salesperson brought in 20% of our business, and he was fired in 3 days. And I can tell you, we were in a very competitive field, and the competition couldn't believe their luck. So, because, because we had this, there are not 100 companies that size, and, and we had competitors delivering the same content, arguably bigger companies. They were bigger than us, but we were getting it through our customer service and quality of delivery. But as soon as that personal relationship left, they had no reason to stay with us. So I think personally, what I don't like is to see people come in and eliminate your brand, put in their brand as if you didn't exist. I think the term used with our second acquirer was to sunset our company. I mean, we'd been running that company for a very long time. The name was the brand was really well established. I just think it's a shame people don't understand. I think at the higher level, at the larger corporate deals, people are much more scientific about mergers and acquisitions. But I felt more sad about the fact that they didn't recognize the value. They didn't recognize that they were extinguishing what they paid for, because you don't build a company overnight, and you don't build customer loyalty overnight, and they trust you. And when you've gone, if there are nice people replacing you, who are proving that they took the right choice to work with us in the first place, and respecting, if that respect isn't there, and they want to put a new step down, then people might as well look around the market again and say, well, maybe I can get a better deal elsewhere.
Yeah, because I would imagine that in a training company, if I just think about the business model itself, a training company has a group, a large group of people that you rely on to deliver, to create content, to deliver, to update, to keep students and customers happy, to make sure that all the administration is done, especially if it's accredited. You probably need to go through a few hoops in terms of making sure certificates are issued, et cetera, et cetera. So there's quite an ecosystem that exists within a training business. And I think sometimes there are a few things that are not always visible when you're going in to buy one of these, unless you're in that industry, of course. But if I think about then that that sense that of your staff, of your employees that were loyal and went with you on a journey, um, the loss of a staff member such as a top sales guy leaving within a few days, I mean, that does a lot to make it very, very, very difficult for whoever's buying the entity. Let's put the shoe on the other foot. Can you do that? I don't know if you can, but let's I mean, left shoe and a right foot. Yeah, I don't know if that will work, but I mean, just you know what I mean. Let's move to the other side. Let's say, okay, other side of the coin. I think that's the way to say it. So you're now in the acquisition position.
Yeah.
You've done acquisitions.
Yes.
Not knowing what you know of being on the receiving end. What do you think, and what have you done in terms of best practice, in terms of knowing that there's not just financial transaction, you're dealing with people. Tell us a bit about that. I mean, what is your sense around there?
Well, my my experience actually on the people side has been slightly limited because the companies we bought typically have been smaller than us and have had a few staff. But what I can say is that if the business is successful, you need the key staff to stay on board. So we've actually been really careful in keeping, for example, in the last acquisition I made in my previous company, we brought on board a content developer who proved to be so good that he changed the systems we were using, saved us money. He wasn't familiar with the technical training that we were doing, but soon became familiar. He was a very bright guy. Went all the way through, and I'm glad to say that when the company who bought us took us on, they took him on, and he's still there today, 5 years later, however many years. So I do think that you want to, it's the same thing the other way around. If a company is successful, why is it successful? It must be successful because of the people working there. Not all of them. And clearly, where you've got a total, I mean, if you've got an overlap, you've got an accountant, they've got an accountant, you trust your accountant. You can't have two accountants. But well, you can, but you would normally, and not in this SME. But as you say, our training business was technical. We needed content development. We needed administration. We need to look after the trainers. We need intellectual property. All these things you've got to look at. And in your organization, you will know. And just to answer another point you made, I would always buy, or I would always get a subject matter expert to help buy a product, a company. I wouldn't go into a field I didn't understand because I just don't have confidence. So now I'm going to make a success of it. I need somebody on board who understood that industry, or it would have been an industry I understood. But I think you really got to respect, firstly, the people, and secondly, the brand. So, for example, when we maintained the brand of the company, my last acquisition, we maintained it. For years. And my previous acquisition, we joined the two names together for a while. For about a year and a half, we had the name of the company I bought attached to the name of my company, so that you could recognize anybody dealing with the company we bought could still see that company was there. And then as they got used to us, and slowly we'd faded out. And I think that's so much more important than just saying, right, that's it. Your brand's gone.
Yeah, yeah. I also, from a governance point of view, I'm just going to touch on that. You may or may not have implemented a full governance structure, but I want to just touch on. I attended an event for higher education some weeks back, and what was very evident within the governance frameworks that they have is there's an educational board and the teams that fall under that. And then there's the finance and commercial side of an educational institution. And an e-learning business, I would imagine, follows a similar sort of pattern. You get those people that are really, really strong in creating curriculum, putting the materials together, doing the certifications, etc. Because often these things, in order to brand yourself, you would potentially have to do a few things to make it yours, I'm guessing, and you would actually have to have the subject matter experts. But sometimes the educationalist fraternity, let's say, don't necessarily have the commercial acumen around is that a viable or a doable product to be putting out there. And you also got to you got to bring in, and most government institutions don't have to worry too much about this, but from a commercial or a private company, you got to think about the sales and marketing end, because if you look about branding, packaging, the intake, because often with e-learning, you could probably take people in at any time, and you could probably have multiple cohorts and so on, which makes it a little easier. But you've got to potentially have hybrid type learning. I want to just hear if by the time you were involved in that, did you do any of that sort of crossover? And I started with the governance side, with this conflict between commercial, education, and the sales marketing. I wouldn't call it conflict. Let's just call it they're not necessarily always in alignment. I'm just throwing it out there. Tell us your experience, because e-learning as an industry for me is massively interesting. And e-learning as an industry, I think, has got a long way to go in terms of becoming a proper mature industry. There's a lot of people doing things, but they're taking classroom learning and just putting it online, which is not the same as doing proper e-learning. And I just find that there's sometimes a conflict between the money side, the sales and marketing, the ability to bring people in and package it properly, and then the other side, I mean, the educational and so on. Just do you have any comment on that? I mean, tell me a little bit about that sort of dynamic.
Well, I think if you sit down with the development team, you're soon seduced into listening to them and hearing, what amazing products they can develop and how it's going to be so successful. And then you've got to go away and count to 10 and then sit down with somebody more commercial, put your commercial hat on and say, well, that all sounds great. Am I going to be able to sell it? And usually, it may well be, not usually, but it's often the case you can't sell it. It's a great idea. The other way is you can't shortcut. So, for example, e-learning is becoming much more interactive and engaging. People want to see interaction; they want to be engaged. So, in the past, you'd click on the button and run the course, and you might have some quizzes at the end. That was fine. But in my last company, we did exactly what you mentioned. We had classroom content. We put it onto our learning management system, and we knew that wasn't going to wash. So we then teamed up with a video training organization. We teamed up with practice virtual labs organization. We teamed up with the exam prep organization. We created an ecosystem so that when you went in, you had all these things to do, which were all different, which made sure you were ready to take your exam. With our current business, we are doing the same, except that it's slightly changed. We're looking at assessment tools to decide exactly where you need the training. And we're looking at gamification to keep people engaged, because you can't necessarily keep people engaged if you are not there talking to them. Some people insist on hybrid learning, and that's fine. And we'll get up in our new business to deliver hybrid as well. But we are essentially an online learning or an e-learning company. I think e-learning is definitely a stick. Yesterday I met somebody who's now teaching coding to kids from 3 years upwards. It's absolutely fantastic. Another person who's teaching UX, IX to kids of 6 years upwards. They're teaching not only the UX but also empathy. So that they're trying to get kids much more attuned to the new digital age. And then we've got to go back to our coalition and look at the stats of 11 million people who have no digital skills. Typically, they're going to be people, unfortunately, who haven't had that benefited from that education, or that people who are in the upper age group who got caught out by the pandemic and couldn't book their GP appointments or couldn't order their food online. So it's a big wide world. There's a ton of stuff to do, and we're just trying to get a peg hole there and keep pushing.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I'm gonna continue on that theme, because I think from an e-learning point of view, I think the scope is massive. And when you coming from an M&A and an integrations point of view, when you're going in and you're doing an integration, you got to be thinking, I'm guessing, not just the standard sort of model, but you got to think about how you could, let's call it, spin the current infrastructure uh, out into a much more engaging, a much more, I would say, it's different, because now people are even doing these goggle, I think Meta
Yeah.
doing these, these virtual reality type of training. And I think it's become quite crazy, and everyone's got the answer kind of thing. um, and I think e-learning is probably going to go through quite a significant change in time to come. And as learning and information become more accessible, the difficulty, and I'm going to ask you this as the owner of an e-learning business, if I think about commoditization, so 20, 30 years ago, to find information somewhere, it was pretty difficult, wasn't it? It was really difficult to get something. Now you've got, for instance, on LinkedIn bought lynda.com. Lynda.com was a great little e-learning type of portal. They pulled it into LinkedIn, and now they call it LinkedIn Learning. And a lot of that is, if you're on one of their premium packages or whatever, that's for free. You've got other platforms that have got loads of training. They might not be certified, but um, they like 10, 20 pounds a go. It's highly commoditized. And then on the flip side, you got all these premium courses, and then you still have the universities charging 20 to 25,000 pounds minimum per year for a degree. Which then again, I mean, that's excessive in terms of pricing, and that's probably just going to go up. Um, but everybody's in this sort of state of flux. That's my view of the e-learning space, and that's why I thought to have you today as a guest. Tell us a bit. I mean, in terms of the future, now you're an M&A guy. You've done startups. You've done acquisitions. You've done sales. I mean, you've done your own. You sold your own businesses and so on. Tell us what your crystal ball says about the future. I mean, where is this stuff going in terms of e-learning?
There was a really good TikTok sent to me the other day. A couple get into their Mercedes. It's all in German, so I couldn't follow it. But I could follow it visually. And the guy turns the key on, and the screen comes on and gives him an instruction to do something. And he does it, and it says no, wrong instruction, not no, incorrectly performed. He's in a hurry to drive home. Please do something else. And then the wife says, "Let me do it." And then she talks to the machine, and it comes out and says, "No, you've got to do this." And then it says, "Your boot's open." And they're running around trying to drive their car out of the garage, and this computer's just throwing instructions at them and refusing to let them do anything. I think we're going to, we're going to be in that kind of environment the rest of our lives. So better get used to it. Um, the tough question that everybody asks any business owner is, so why should I buy from you? What makes you different? And that always gives me shivers down the spine. But you've got to have the answer, and our answer is, don't have. We've earned these customer service awards, we've earned these quality awards. I put them all in the corner because, but you've got to win awards. You've got to prove to yourself you can win. You've got to look after your customer. You've got to have great product, and you've got to have super staff. 3 components. If I have that, I'm happy.
Well said. Well said. I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of the space. I mean, that example about the boot's open, but they probably couldn't find the boot because they didn't know that they actually had one. I just recall one of my children. I think I don't know how old they were. They got an assignment from the teacher saying, um, "Go home, and what you have to do is you got to video yourself changing the tire, the wheel of a motor car. So you can do whatever research you want. But what you got to do is you got to film yourself, and then part of your project is obviously to put this film together and then submit it to get marks." So my son goes, and he's never done it before, and he was just not old enough yet for me to show him yet. But I mean, it was quite a good assignment and a good lesson in terms of the problem we have in terms of real life and the stuff that you can sort of just skim through online. And he went online and he was researching and he was checking various sites and all that, and how to do it and so on. And I said, okay, fine, let's do it. And I had this Mercedes SUV, and we were going, and I said, okay, let's start. And then he said, where's the spare wheel?
I didn't have one.
So I said, well, let's look for it. And so what we did was we went and I opened this and I opened that. I said, where's the spare wheel? It's like, oh shoot. I mean, we can't even start now. And he's ready. He's done all his research. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. Let's go into the user manual of the actual vehicle. And I'll show you quickly. It's actually underneath. But you need to go in from the top, and you need to unwind this thing here to drop the tire onto the ground so that you can then unhook it and then move it out. But remember, now you got to undo the actual nuts, the bolts, and all that kind of thing, and you got to do all this and that, and you can't do it when it's jacked up, because if you do that, you're going to throw the car over because it's unsafe. So none of his videos had any safety. None of his videos even showed that they're different models of vehicles. I mean, they were just showing random stuff. And even the manual in the car didn't really show properly, proper diagrams and so on. And it was real life experience for him to now take something that looks like, oh, that looks easy. But when you actually have to physically do it, it's a different story. So the other problem was he wasn't strong enough to actually lift the wheel to put it on. So I ended up helping him do it, and we changed the wheel, and he did his video, and everything worked out absolutely fine. But I just want to bring that back to the sort of new e-learning space. And unfortunately or fortunately, we work in a knowledge world where lots of people have lots of knowledge, but they don't necessarily have the hands-on. They're not getting trained hands-on. And I think there's a shortage of hands-on things. And I think that's the difficulty. That comes back to your people looking for, this instruction that the computer's telling them to do, but because they physically haven't done it, they don't even know how the car has been put together. So, I mean, I don't say everyone has become mechanics or whatever. I'm just saying that it's just very interesting to see that everything's become knowledge. Everybody knows everything about everything, but when it comes to actually doing it, it's a totally different story. And what I'd like to see in the e-learning space is that experiential learning is part and parcel of where things are going. But that's my own view. But going into the future, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about. Tell me about your company. And I see that you come up as, if I just go back to that, extensive entrepreneurial startup through successful business sales, M&A, strong deal contacts, education sector, relationship builder, linguist, and networker. So I'm gonna finish with that. I mean, basically we're at the end of the hour now, and I want you to give us the background of the current company. I want you to tell people really, how do they get hold of you if they want to talk to you, and just give us a flavor of sort of what does make you different. I know it gives you a chill down your spine, but why you, Robin? Like what makes you special and different?
Okay, so just picking up on those various points, the name of the company is Barefoot eLearning, barefooteLearning.com. We specialize in training people in digital skills. We can do much more technical stuff, but typically we're doing either skilling people for life or for work so that they can get a better job or upskill in their job. We also have a whole portfolio of soft skills, so we can deal with stress management, with time management, with leadership skills, and with hospitality, for example. I'm supposed to be flying off to Spain, and I'm not sure that my flights will fly because people have left the airlines to go into hospitality. Maybe we should sell less training in hospitality. No, and I have to say I'm really excited by the people I'm working with. I think they have a fantastic, and in fact, I just think there's a great blend of the new generation of people around us have got such strong entrepreneurial spirit that it really is exciting. So I'm really enjoying doing what I do. And I think that we've got a great team. All our content is video based. None of it is very lengthy. And we're looking constantly to reinvent, to disrupt, to make it more engaging. And so, a year from now, I'm sure that will be again very different. Also putting all my history into a book. It's not going to be a big book. It's going to be a short book. It's really about entrepreneurs, learning the hard way. And basically, I've touched on quite a few points today. I just hope that it'll be of interest to some people to see what I did.
I'm sure it will. Yeah, I'm sure it will, and it's a space as well that you've carved out for yourself, which is unique. I mean, this is not an everyday space. I mean, e-learning, getting into this environment, I think it takes a special and a unique individual to have gone through this journey of technology change from the 90s, where it was just pure technical, now into the softer skills, thinking about how do we do this better while keeping the business growing and developing. How do we keep disrupting? How do we keep reinventing? And I think it's a fascinating journey. And I think from the 90s to now, I mean, there's been a huge amount of reinventing, and I really think, and I wish you absolutely all the best, Robin. I think, and I'll be, please let me know when you come on the next episode. I want you to go through your book a bit and share some of the stories and anecdotes and pinpoint a few golden nuggets, takeaways for the audience and so on. And maybe that's how we can sort of leave and end the podcast, is if you've got anything to share around M&A integrations, anything to do with even disruption, and because you are constantly integrating as it is in a space, although you in an entity, I think you're continuously integrating new technologies, new methods of learning, new ways of doing the same thing. So as a sort of a goodbye, give a gift to the audience, sort of a golden nugget or two, if you can.
So the golden nuggets, I don't say, but for next time then.
No, there's more to come, because you're a guy with lots of experience.
I think the world has changed. You can now get money, as I said earlier in our recording. You can now access funds more readily from venture capitalists and from crowdfunding. But in my day, you went to a bank, you borrowed money, you signed a guarantee. And I hated signing guarantees. And I then found I'd signed the wrong guarantee. And that is one of the worst experiences I've ever had, is realizing that I signed a guarantee, sold the business, paid off the bank loan, started a new business, borrowed money from a different bank, but it was related. And suddenly they appear and they say, right, you're going to have to pay the money back. Otherwise we own all your assets. And I said, that can't be right. And they said, oh, well, 10 years ago, you signed a guarantee. And I said, I signed a guarantee secured on the company. No, it wasn't. It was secured on you. And the only way to cancel it is for you to go to the bank and cancel your personal all monies guarantee. So, they're pretty disingenuous. And I just think you've got to be so careful not to get to that step, because it's just not worth it. Well, but the thing about an entrepreneur is that you would get nowhere if you were too cautious. So we've taken risks, and thank goodness.
And you've done incredibly well. And Robin, I'm loving the career and the journey that you've done. I'm really looking forward to your book. Um, I really just think that the e-learning, education, teaching people, making sure people are skilled. I think it's a gift. I think it's something. It's a calling for me. I mean, I just, from an educational point of view, my mother was a teacher for around 50 years. I mean, she was an educationist. It was her calling. I mean, she didn't matter any time of day. She was there, she was helping, and that was her calling in life. And I think if you're in e-learning and this type of, you might be in business, which is fine. You still need a bit of challenge. But I think from a educational point of view, I think it's a wonderful thing to be in, to help people improve their lives, to get them to the next level, and to take them potentially to the place where they're fulfilling their own purpose and getting and having better fulfillment in their lives. And I think that's e-learning is going to make learning much more accessible around the world. And I think that's a fantastic journey. But you must come on the next show. And yes, you are going to have more golden nuggets. And yes, no matter what business you're in, there's always stuff happening.
Yeah.
We won't use a word that is not allowed on TV or on a video recording, but stuff happens, and we just have to learn to deal with it.
Exactly.
Robin, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Please stay on the line. I'm going to just say goodbye to our audience, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, everyone. This is 100 Days and Beyond, the podcast that focuses on the business owners, the entrepreneurs, the M&A practitioners, the people that do the integration work, the people that do the behind the scenes, hard, energy sapping, hard mental dedication, work in the backgrounds to make businesses work. And the journeys that they go through, they're real, they're human beings, and there are challenges that come our way. And especially if you've been in a smaller business environment, you've got to cover so many different bases. And when it comes to integration work, M&A work, if you've bought or sold smaller businesses, the complexities that you've got to deal with are potentially sometimes very overwhelming. And I think Robin has done a fantastic job in his career. And I mean, I'm just very, very happy that Robin's continued to be in the e-learning sector and to continue growing and expanding where he's going right now. Thank you again for joining us today, our podcast listeners, our live stream listeners. Thank you again. Please join us on our next episode of 100 Days and Beyond, where we'll have another guest that will, I'm hoping, again, will give you the background and understanding of where we are in this wonderful, complicated, yet I think highly rewarding world of M&A and everything else that happens around it. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a good weekend. Hi, everybody. This is Dudley again. And if you need help with a future or existing post-merger integration, I want to invite you to arrange a free, no obligation meeting with us. During the meeting, we'll find out exactly what you need, what your challenges are, and we'll explain how our unique PMI slipstream method can help you. Simply call us or visit mergerintegration.co.uk. That's mergerintegration.co.uk, or come to our website, skillfulpursuit.com.